Hi everyone. Today I wanted to continue talking about lighting forms to make them look more three-dimensional. So the first part I figured out after practicing all week was about values. So what values are is basically black and white, or like your darkest dark you make on your page. So I'll just shade this in quickly. And the brightest bright you can make on your page, and any tone in between, right? So it's important to at least figure out if you figure out just black and white, you should be able to draw a lot of things and make them look three-dimensional. But to make it look more three-dimensional and to add more depth, you would need to add a few more shades in between. So if this is my white and this is my black, I'm going to start off by just coloring this in pretty lightly. And then the rest I'm just going to shade in a little bit darker, but do it in pieces. So I have this, and I'm going to go darker on this by adding a second layer of shading to it. And then I'm going to add, and I'm going to go straight into here too, just to make this darker. And I'm going to add a third one. Now I'm trying to make sure I could see the separation between each value. So I think I'm going to darken this more, and then darken this more, and then darken this way more, just so we could see the difference between the values. So here is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 value scale. You can go up to like 1,000,000, but you generally don't need too much different values. Most people kind of just use like 5. Some people use 3. It all depends on the style you're going for whatever like art style, or yeah, any art, whatever art style you're trying to get. Is all based on like the amount of values you put into it. And then other than that, it's like proportions and other things that add to it. But in this, we're just specifically talking about shading and lighting. So when you light an object, if we pretend the object, in this case, is just a ball and it's in a dark room. So I'm just going to shade this all dark. So without light, very easy to draw. You draw whatever you want and then you shade it all. There's no light here, but once we add light, there's a lot of elements that we're going to have to think about. So I'm going to add my ball here, and I'm going to say that the light is coming towards it like this. So first I'm looking at the forms and seeing how this light is going to wrap around this ball. So I'm thinking it's going to hit here, and it's going to light, I'm going to say it's going to light this edge too. And it's not going to really touch the bottom too much. Second thing I'm thinking, I'm going to erase that a little bit. If this is a table, how the light is going to hit the table. So we already indicated that the light comes up to here. So I'm going to say from this, it's kind of like fades off and goes like this. So that's like the way the light's coming into the scene. And then this next, I'm going to think about the cast shadow. So whatever this object is casting on the surroundings of like where it is. So the cast shadow for this was probably hit the ground like at an angle like here. We're going to see some shadow right under the ball, and we're going to hit the top. We're going to see the back of the ball as dark. We're going to have a little bit of shadow there. So I'm just going to shade in my shadows quickly and shade in my shadows here. Darken the center part just because it's the core, and darken where I know for sure there's not too much shadow. And then the rest I'm going to just shade out where I know where there's no light going. So the rest of the background is going to be in dark, or at least up to here. But because it's not where the light's focusing, it's going to get darker around the edges of the frame that I'm drawing. So right there. Let's say, yeah, I'm going to just basically shade out the back. because it's not being hit by light. It's being blocked by the ball. Now, even though all of this area is in shadow, the ball is still going to cast a little bit of darkness on the wall from the light hitting it. It's just not going to be as sharp. It's going to be a little bit more soft. Same for the shadow on the ball. So I'm going to soften the shadow, like the shading on the ball, to make it look more round. And sharpen out my edges. There. So because the ball has more than one like side to it, it's basically like a perfect sphere, right? So it's all soft edges, and I'm making my shading a little bit softer. So for example, let's say this is a curved ribbon and this is just two planes. And they're both being lit at the top. So for this one, I'm going to shade it in really soft. I'm going to darken it at the edge right here. And then I'm going to shade in the rest. And I'm going to smudge it up towards the light. And here's my edge. So this is that softness, because technically, unlike this shape, this is just like a bunch of lines, right? Like if I were to do a wireframe or wireframe of this object, it would be a lot more lines than this. This one is fairly simple. I'm going to sharpen that edge and then just shade in my value for whatever the shadow is. So that's because this part is being lit and this part isn't. Another thing you could think about is like light fall off, which is like basically it getting darker the further away it gets from the light. So because this is in shadow, I'm going to just add a little bit darker at the bottom here. And I'm going to add a little bit of shadow right here, just to indicate that there is a little bit of light fall off. And I'm making that one soft too, because it's the same, it's the light hitting the same plane, but it's just not as powerful as it goes away from the light. So that's the curve. I'm gonna just clean this up, make it have a little bit more of a highlight. There. So darken the bottom here for this one. There we go. There. I'm going to fix here. There. Now, there is something incorrect in this drawing that I'm doing right now, and that is there's no bounce light. So in the real world, light bounces. So this light that's hitting this is probably going to bounce off the ball and hit other parts of whatever room or space it's in, and then causing light to bounce back up. It won't be as strong as the direct light going towards the ball, but there will be like a subtle difference between like this edge and the one right near the ball, or like the bottom of the ball. So I'm going to draw thinking of that now. So here's my frame. Here's my ball, and we're thinking of a light hitting it from the same angle. I'm going to add where my light's hitting, around there. So now I'm going to put some shade in, but I'm going to do it really light this time because I'm thinking about bounce light. So I want to be able to have the room to add the bounce light later on. So get the whole room in. If you might be noticing, I'm kind of shading at the way the room moves. So the wall is up and the table is towards us. It's a good way of showing a little bit of perspective. And then I'm adding my shading. There. And then I'm just going to make the ball's shadow here a little the same as the wall in the back. So we know that there's going to be a shadow that comes out right here. And because the light's coming from the bottom, there's going to be a little bit of the ball right there. So that's our shadow. I'm just outlining it for now. That's going to be basically the darkest dark. But because of this light, there's going to be a little bit brightness right here, so I'm erasing that out. I'm just gonna shade it in and add this right here, which is just a contact shadow, but people call it, you could call it the occlusion shadow, which means light can't get in between the ball and the tables. And then I'm going to darken out my main shadow right here. I'm going to now I'm going to add my actual shading for the ball itself. Thinking about specifically that that edge where the shadow, like thinking specifically about the bounce light and how when the light hits the ball, if it's bouncing down here and kind of shooting back up towards the ball. So I'm leaving a little bit of space for the ball not to have like any space, for the area where the ball will have a little bit of light. So I'm adding a little subtlety. I'm also adding a little bit of shadow on the edge over here, just because it's curving away from the light. So I'm going to add a little bit. And this is basically also indicating like the edge of the ball. So if the light hits here, we know this is going to be bright. So I'm just going to add a little bit of shading, but not too light. It's not going to, I don't want it as bright as the light hitting the ball, right? So I'm shading all this in. That's the edge. I'm going to soften that out just so we have a nice form. And we can see that drop off. And because it's hitting here, I'm keeping this area lighter. I'm going to darken this area a bit more because there's not going to be enough light to kind of hit it enough. This back area, because of the bounce light, it's going to be a little bit brighter than this side. I'd say this side would be all fairly dark. Like even up to this corner. So darken that out and get darker as I go away. And I'm using this edge here to kind of like separate which side will be lighter and which side will be dark. Darkening and like lifting my hand a little just to make it a little lighter. Now I'm going to kind of indicate the separation between like the bounce light and the actual shadow of the ball. There we go. A little bit of darkness right here, because it's just the contact of the ball and the floor. There. So this would be a ball lit up in one point with the bounce light hitting around, right? So it's hitting here and hitting straight back down and going back to the ball, things like that. Same for this. This one area is lit just because of the light not being as dark as it can be here. And then on this edge, we just have it a little lighter to indicate where the light's coming from. To indicate that the light is coming from here and it's hitting a little bit of that edge, but not enough to make it as light as the ball. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is light brightness. So basically, light can be really dim and it could also be really bright. And depending on that, I noticed that people kind of always go to the maximum amount of brightness with the maximum amount of darkness whenever you see like a drawing or painting. But there's like so many different watts of light you could get that makes it more dim or bright, right? So let's say this ball is being lit by a candle, which is dimmer than artificial lights that we have in the, like that we use nowadays everywhere. So this same ball, it's actually fairly simple. Because it's lit by a candle, I'm going to say it's going to basically the exact same position as this and that. Because it's lit by a candle, we know it's not as strong as artificial light. So the brightest that can get for me in my head, like while I'm thinking about this, is around here. So I'm basically shading everything in this case because I know I'm going to darken it more. And this will be my lightest light throughout the rest of this whole drawing. So this will be my lightest light now. And now I'm going to add my darkest darks. I would say shadows kind of stay the same generally. My darkest darks will be the transition between light and dark. I'm going to softly blend that in a little. I'm going to add my cast shadows in. There we go. Darken that out because that's fairly easy to get done. There's my cast shadows. I'm going to shade in my light here. I'm going to add a little bit of bounce. So I'm going to darken this edge a little bit more and kind of just swoop it to and connect it to here. Add that occlusion, which basically gives me like a space for a perfect line. Yeah. And I'm going to sweep that up just to give it a little bit more shape. And I'm going to make my shadow a bit darker, like softer here. Just because it'll help me with like darkening the scene a bit more. Now, because I know that's my lightest light right here, I'm going to start adding my darks. So I'm kind of just on the wall behind the ball, I'm just adding all this. There we go. I'm kind of following like the edge of the ball and kind of emitting out because that kind of helps with like kind of showing where a person should look. It's because it's like kind of like a border on the ball itself. Even though it looks sporadic, it kind of helps with like where a person should focus. And the floor of the ball is on. I'm going to try to make it dark and come in and kind of blend with the light. Darken this area a bit more. There you go. And then darker on this side, kind of still trying to make it follow some type of perspective, sweeping it in. Same for this end right here. Sweeping it in, sweeping it up a bit. That's where the light's coming from. I shouldn't have darkened it as much as I did. And I'm gonna use my thumb to kind of soften that because it's way too dark. I messed up there. Darkening this edge here. So basically, this ball is in a dimmer room than this ball, right? Because the brightest bright on this is brighter than the lightest light on this. And you could even go darker, right? So let's say this ball is the light is even darker. It's not like a candle. It's something that can't emit enough power. We could shade this a little. We could basically shade the whole scene in my case, just because I have the value set. I'm going to shade everything. Trying to keep my hand at like the same heaviness that I'm putting on the page. There. And I'm going to darken out my darks a little bit more. A little bit more shadow. And this ball is now in a darker room, right? So this is the lightest light. And my darks are basically the same. I'm going to darken out the background a bit just to have help with like the emphasis. There. And now this is a light in a darker room. So thinking about how dark and bright your light is, you can be able to tell like different stories and emit different tones that you want while in your drawings themselves. And now the final, or I have two more lighting situations I want to talk about. One is outdoors on a sunny day where it's the brightest thing on the planet. Like, so it's a very sunny, so everything's really bright. Here's my ball. I would say sunny day, the thing you will notice is the shadows are brighter than like a normal shadow now, right? So it's a sunny day, we're outside, and this ball is on this table. So we're gonna add my shadow here. I'm just gonna clean that up. I wanna point out where the light's coming from first. So here's where the light's coming from. And now we're gonna add a shadow right here. That's where my shadow is, right? So let's say this whole floor is white. Yeah, let's say the floor is white and the ball is white, and the sun is hitting, and because it's the sun hitting, the rays there's like a million rays just going boom, 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 like going at whatever angle it is. I just forgot. There is no light direction when it comes to the sun. So the sun's hitting everywhere, and but except where the sun is coming from. So let's say the sun's coming from this direction, so it's hitting the ball in the same direction as kind of like our other drawings, but because it's outdoors, light's bouncing everywhere, and it has like some places it doesn't have place to reflect and hit back down, and it's all like spread out. But the sun's beams are so bright that they're still hitting at a specific angle depending on the day, right? So in this case, I'm gonna leave everything bright, and I'm just gonna shade it in, but not as dark as I am like when it's in a room or something. And you're basically fine with just these two. You can also add your occlusion shadows, which is like your darkest dark shadows, where light can't even go under the ball, right? So I'm just gonna add that and kind of fade that into my shadow here. And this is basically an example of a ball in the bright sunlight. It does the shadow itself doesn't have to be as dark, and the forms on the light, it doesn't have to be as bright. Another thing I want to add is that bounce light that's technically going to be hitting the wall and hitting back. I'm going to darken out this edge a little, just between where the shadow starts and the light starts, just a transition. Just making it a little bit darker. The reason why is I want to kind of indicate, I want to soften it. Yeah. It's because I want to show this part right here. This little highlight right there is basically the bounce light. So it's not going to be as dark as the, it's not going to be as bright as the sunlight hitting this, but it'll be a little light for you to like tell that there's some light like hitting somewhere and hitting this again, right? So this is a pretty good way of showing like an outdoor scenario. And now let's talk about like indoor lights. So like what if you're inside and there's just a single light at the top hitting down on you. So let's draw something like that right now. And it's not like directly hitting whatever object we're talking about. So in this case, there. Here. Okay, so we have a ball, and the light's not hitting the ball directly, but it's coming from maybe right here. We got a lamp, and it's emitting light. So things will kind of get softer the further you get away from the light, and darker, of course, because it's further from the light. So I'm gonna start by saying my lightest light is just this tone, whatever tone I'm getting right now. This is my lightest light. There we go. So that's my lightest light. So continuing, this room's light isn't like a spotlight. So it's not like pointing directly at this thing where you'll get like a sharper shadow and light distinction. I would say it's closer to this right here. It's a softer light where you will see things are brighter, but they won't have as much of a shadow as it is when it's in the sun or some like a direct spotlight. So because the light's coming from here, I'm going to say there's shadow right here. I'm keeping it soft, not only because it's a ball, but because just the light's not going to hit as harshly as it does like all these other parts. So I also noticed that there's shadow coming from where I'm like my lighting right now, which is just a window. So yeah, I'm going to add my cast shadow, kind of just coming away from the light and hitting. You'll still have your occlusion, so areas where light kind of just doesn't hit, which is the bottom of the ball. And kind of blends up. And the bounce light, because the light's coming here, I'm going to erase this area, kind of lighten it up. And just make a light, use my hand a little bit with a lighter touch to get where the light's coming from. Even on the ball, I'm going to kind of lighten that up. This looks cool, but it's not correct because I already said my brightest bright is a little bit darker than usual. I'm also going to shade in where the shadow is now on the ball. And even though it's darker here, I'm going to go over and so I could get the floor on that side. There we go. Light's coming here. I'm going to darken out here. But I'm going to like kind of think about like the bounce of the light coming from here, right? So it's hitting down and it's going to hit the walls a bit. So I'm going to darken the top of the wall a bit more than I darken the bottom of the wall. Trying to represent it as best as possible, but we'll see. Getting a little light here. I'm going to darken closer to the ball over here, but lighten as it comes out because of the way that the light's bouncing around this room. And then this is going to be lighter. I'm not really going to darken it anywhere near there. Now I'm going to softly pull in my darks towards the light using my finger. Same for the shadow. Shadow I might pull out. And the ball itself, I'm going to get that softness. I'm trying to pull the darks towards the light. And I might darken out this edge a little bit more just to indicate the separation, show the object a little. There you can see a little bit of highlight right here from the space that I erased, so I want to keep that. It's an accident, so. But I got it, so I'm going to keep it. And here's my softer light. Just because of the light in a room is kind of bouncing around everywhere, it's a bit dimmer than the spotlight or the sun, but this is generally how I kind of think about indoor lights. You can get stronger lights that give more of a look like this, but it would also hit the rest of the walls too. So if I were to change this into like a more indoor scene with a strong light hitting kind of everywhere, I'm gonna erase the top part because that's where the light's coming from, because it's a room. Erase right there. Let's say this ball is right under the light itself, right? So I'm gonna darken all this. This is a quicker one, it's a quick sketch. Darken all this. The light's not hitting here. This is going to be the shadow, the darkest part. Add my frame again. There we go. Light this up here. I'm going to erase the bottom here. There we go. Add my darker like transition thing. I think it's called a terminator. I don't know why. soften that because I want my lightest light to just not be as bright. Yeah. And then there's not going to be this shadow right here. It's not going to be a thing. So I'll use my finger to kind of smudge out. Darken the bottom a little. And right here, because there's going to be bouncing light everywhere, right? So it's going to hit this area. So it's not going to darken like everywhere. It's going to be a little bit more flatter unless you put something closer to the light. And it's more like, so it kind of bounces around more than it does with a spotlight like this or that. There we go. So now I would say this is like a general lighting scenario with a ball in a room. Now, if I really want, I could add my second light, right? So this is just one light. It's a room light. Boom, and that's our room, and it's bouncing everywhere. Now, if I wanted to say, okay, that same light that I had here is hitting the ball, I'm gonna erase that whole part. Say this is all my highlight. Oh, look, it looks like a window, so I'm just gonna say it's light coming from a window. There's still gonna be a shadow, not as dark. We're gonna get that occlusion. It's gonna be basically as soft. I'm gonna darken as we turn towards the bottom of the ball. Smudge that out. Darken the side here. Give a little bit more darkness here. Kind of indicating that, and keeping a little bit of separation to indicate the light versus dark. Now I would say that's a pretty good representation of like 2 points of light. So the room is a fairly brighter room. And now there's like a really good light coming from the window, causing this sharper shadow hitting the ball and the wall over here. So it causes a sharper shadow right here. There you go. And we can soften it out because the light, we could get it a little darker towards the wall. Boom. And now there's a light coming from here, maybe from a window. If you want, I'll just add a little shadow in the middle. Oh, maybe like the kind of curving with the ball, but indicating that this is a light from a window. Good. And I guess finally, this is one way of having the sun, but as the sun sets, it gets darker. So it gets dark. The sun's intensity still stays as strong, but like generally the lighting, like during golden hour, it's still darker than like at like a bright sunny day during like noon or stuff. So the difference would just be this would be shaded a little more, like a little dark, brighter, like a lot brighter than this, but still darker. But you'll have like sharp shadows still coming just from the intensity of the sun. I wanted to talk about one more thing, which is just like the local value, which is basically like if your shirt's blue and you're wearing white pants. So that's fairly straightforward. So before you add all your light and shading like this, you'll just add where like that local value is, right? So I could even do it after. So right here, I'm going to say this ball has like a T on it. T all around it. Yeah, and it makes a T, and that T is darker. So I'm just going to shade it in. So this T is like a painted, so if the ball's white, it's painted blue or something. Depending on the color, it gets darker or brighter, but for now, I'm just saying, okay, ball's white, this T is blue. And then I'm just going to shade into the shadow itself and make sure it looks like it's on the object, 1. And 2, it gets darker when it gets into the shadow because the color of that area, that part in the shadow is darker than the white. So it's blue, so it's a bit darker in the shadow. Same for the light itself. And that's like the basic part of just local colors and how light affects different colors and patterns on walls and stuff like that. that's everything I know about like the basics of lighting and how I kind of think while I'm like making pictures and trying to like light images and stuff like that. So if you have any questions, you can always comment, like and subscribe for more. Thanks.